Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Terry McLaurin. These are just a few of the more blatant examples of great receivers falling to the mid-rounds. But the truth is, like many positions, the NFL is getting the receiver class wrong year after year after year and never learning from their mistakes. Last season, I'm sure I got plenty of stuff wrong, but there were some receivers being overlooked who I feel like I had a lot higher than most, and some receivers being overrated who I had a lot lower than most. It is my humble opinion that the consensus is misunderstanding this 2025 class even more than last season's class. Today I'm going to give you the more notable differences I have in my views on this receiver class, and then at the end of the video I'll give you my official ranking. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing as it greatly supports the channel. Let's start with the big one. Tetairoa McMillan is almost everyone's wide receiver one, and it's not surprising. His 1,316 receiving yards was second in college football this season, and he did it in a way that gets people very excited when they watch the highlights. In part due to his 18 contested catches, he was truly a dominant force. In fact, he started the season with a 300-yard game with 4 touchdowns. How could this not make you excited about his potential in the NFL? But when you look at the bigger receivers in the league who find success, you've got the likes of Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr. and Drake London. Now don't get me wrong, these guys can all make a contested catch, but they are also very crafty and effective route runners. For them, it's not about finding themselves in acres of space with speed, but it's about using their shifty movement skills in order to gain just a step so that they have the leverage on the defender, and from there they can use their frame to catch the ball where the defender simply can't reach it. McMillan isn't a terrible route runner. He has impressive speed for his size and actually runs some fairly nuanced routes. But in terms of that real ability to stick your foot in the ground and shift, he struggles to find separation against not only college competition, weaker college competition than most receivers will be speaking about. I would consider McMillan's closest comparison to be Keon Coleman from last season's class. Coleman is a good receiver, but I don't see him ripping the league up. McMillan may have a slight edge on Coleman in terms of his contested catch ability, but not enough to overcome a consistent lack of separation in the NFL. But don't worry, there is still a big receiver in this class with all the tools required to be a real success in the league. Someone who has the contested catch ability, but also the shiftiness and true route running ability to really take advantage of his frame. His name is Jaden Higgins. Jaden Higgins is 6'4", 215 pounds. He's got excellent burst for a big man and uses his frame to make catches through traffic consistently. He isn't asked to run a ton of complex routes in this offense, but when he does, he clearly displays that true shiftiness and fluidity that I'm looking for. And so I'm checking the player's background, I'm checking his injury history, everything seems clean. Just a 6'4" outside receiver with the body control and route running ability to separate in the league consistently. So I was curious, why are people not seeing this guy as a top receiver in this class? And almost every scouting report I could find, it was the same thing. People like everything about him, but he doesn't have the long speed to separate downfield. And so there it is. That's the key difference between my evaluation of Higgins and seemingly everyone else's. We don't expect Mike Evans to run a go route and stretch the field with his speed, but he does have 876 yards on receptions into the short and intermediate regions. That's what these types of receivers do. They're your first read and you go to them consistently. You know who leads all of college football in receiving yards in the intermediate regions? Yours truly, Jaden Higgins. Plus, he has this type of production whilst competing with a pretty solid slot receiver they have on this team. In fact, this guy might just have something. Jaden Higgins has the 7th most receiving yards in college football, but just ahead of him with the 6th most is his teammate Jalen Knoll. Noel took about 70% of his snaps out of the slot this season and is listed at 5'11", 200 pounds, although he'll probably end up measuring and weighing a bit less than that. However, this is a guy who's very likely to succeed in the NFL. Everybody seems to be looking for an AJ Brown or a Jamar Chase, but let's take a look at some of the receivers who really made a difference for their team when it mattered most. Khalil Shakir, Ladd McConkey, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, Xavier Worthy, Jaden Reed. All of these guys led their team's receivers in postseason yards, and they all did it with the majority of their snaps out of the slot. Now, I'm not saying it's more valuable to have this than to have a legit X receiver, but don't go chasing that outside receiver and pass on a guy like Jalen Noel. He's tough, brings the ball in through contact, he's extremely nifty and sharp. His long speed may not blow you away because, of course, these short guys have shorter strides, but he does display genuine explosiveness to stretch the field, and more importantly, his routes are the real deal. I do believe even if the league sleeps on this guy and he doesn't get drafted until the mid-rounds, this is someone who's going to pop up on everyone's radar, probably lead his team in receiving yards, and it's not that I don't think the league likes a reliable slot receiver, I just think they're going to like the wrong one. There are two key elements to route running. One that is very underrated in my opinion, which is the fluidity, the shiftiness, the body control, just the pure physical ability of route running. The other element I feel is very overrated, which is the nuance. If you listen to people talk about why Emeka Egbuka is a first-round prospect, you're going to hear words like nuance, technician, understanding, polish. And this does hold some value. Egbuka is running a pro-style route tree. He has been taught how to run routes in the right way, the small details of how to vary the tempo of his routes. He'll walk into the league without needing as much guidance on how to run an NFL route tree. But these are things that many other prospects in this class have in their arsenal, and we're not going to be saying they're a first-round pick. This is very much the Ohio State effect. Any Ohio State receiver who gets a decent proportion of their receiving yards is immediately labelled a high-end prospect because they're nuanced and they're polished and all the rest of it. But there's nothing I see in Egbuka's game that makes me want to even consider drafting him in the first round. He's 6'1", 205 pounds, so decent size. He's got a good pair of hands, brings the ball in consistently. The speed is average, not slow, but no real explosion to him. And his routes don't blow me away. There's no significant snap or fluidity to them. I don't know what else to say other than he's a useful receiver, but there's no team in the league that needs Egbuka. He's not going to change the dynamic of your offense in any way. Now, if I'd sold you on the idea of having a productive slot receiver on your team, but you've seen Jalen Noel come off the board before your team could snap him up, there is a guy who could be going day 3 and has the tools to be that super reliable slot receiver. The reason Kobe Hudson is going under the radar is that he only had 770 receiving yards last season for a low-profile college in UCF. However, this is because for whatever reason, they didn't have him in these games for every snap. They used him a bit more rotationally. Hudson has a rate of 2.7 yards per route run, compared to, for example, Tetairoa McMillan's 2.87. McMillan's whole draft profile is built on productivity, and there's really not much in it. Hudson also did this with very poor quarterback play, and mainly on the outside when he's really going to be a slot receiver due to a lack of speed and size. The only reason I would hesitate to draft Hudson too early is that his hands have been pretty unreliable, but he has good size for a slot receiver at 6'1", 200 pounds, and his routes are seriously crisp and snappy. If he's going to be open as often as I think he could be in the NFL, bringing the ball in isn't going to be as much of an issue. The NFL is a league of trends. I believe Deebo Samuel and the 49ers are to blame for the drafting of Malachi Corley last season. The Jets took him in the 3rd round based purely on his after-the-catch ability. The only problem with this is he doesn't possess the before-the-catch ability, which he needs in order to have the ball in his hands in the first place. This brings me to my issue with Luther Burden. Burden had just 676 receiving yards this season, but had already built his draft stock the season before with 1,209 receiving yards. The issue for me being that about 60% of those yards were after the catch, and even the yards that weren't after the catch were just times where the defense is allowing him to wander into space. With the ball in his hands, Burden is electric, but he simply doesn't possess the ability to get open in the NFL. He may find some success versus zone coverage if there's other good receivers taking the attention away from Burden, but the minute they see Burden as a genuine threat, all they have to do is play man coverage or at least have a defender designated to staying close to him, because again, Burden isn't a sharp enough route runner to get open on his own. This said, someone who is a threat after the catch is excellent if they have the tools to get open. Which leads me to my next prospect. As it happens, Pat Bryant had 373 yards after the catch this season, which is exactly the same amount that Luther Burden had, and he did it with less receptions. And no, I don't think Bryant is as dangerous as Burden after the catch in reality, but he does display the ability to get open on his own. Bryant has decent speed. At 6'3", he has the frame to pluck the ball out of the air, and his routes are pretty elusive. Once he has the ball in his hands, I saw him break the first tackle time and time again. We still have some important names to get to, but I think it's about time I showed you my actual ranking. We start with number 24, Antoine Wells Jr., good after the catch, but not enough genuine ability as a receiver. 23 is Kyle Williams. This guy has built his draft stock on production, but apart from having okay speed, he's not displaying any real NFL starter capabilities. At 22, I have Savion Williams, who I know a lot of people have a lot higher in their rankings, but this is actually a guy more similar to Malachi Corley than even Burden is. As I've discussed, I'm not big on these guys who are great after the catch but don't create any real separation with their routes, and that to me is Savion Williams. Nick Nash at 21 is an interesting story. He was actually a college quarterback for 3 years before his 4th and 5th year, where he converted to the receiver position and actually had a ton of production. He's 6'3" with some real speed, but unfortunately for me at this point in time, that's all he is. I don't think he has what it takes to create separation in the NFL. Torrey Horton at 20 missed most of the season with injury. He's been productive in the past against lower competition, but I think his physical ability will look a lot less impressive in the NFL. Keandre Lambert-Smith at 19, a big receiver with some route running ability, but not enough juice to him in reality. At 18, I have Jalen Royals. He missed most of the season with injury, probably more of a slot guy. He's good after the catch, has a bit of niftiness to him, but ultimately I think he'll look a lot slower and less elusive against NFL competition. I honestly really liked 17 Ty Felton at first, because he's good after the catch and actually runs some pretty nice routes. But then I realised he's about 185 pounds and isn't displaying much explosiveness. Skinny and slow isn't exactly an NFL combination. And then at 16 I have Luther Burden. It's just pure flash in my opinion. There's plenty of guys ahead of him who may not rip the league up, but could easily be a good third receiver for a team. So when I just don't think Burden is going to find separation, I would be lying to have him any higher. 15 is Emeka Egbuka. As we've discussed, I think this whole thing about him being pro-ready is another way of people saying they can't find any other traits that would suggest he's a top prospect. Number 14, Shamar DK, is interesting because I could see this being the Puka Nacua of this class. He never really seemed to do anything special, but just had that physicality and juice to him off the line of scrimmage and would just create a yard of space time and time again against pretty good competition. Number 13, Jack Beck, has been a pretty hot name recently. As a former tight end, he's very tough, brings the ball in through contact, and does have some route running ability. My issue is that he just looks too slow. I don't mean the long speed as much, but it's really the short area quickness that I'm looking for more than anything else, and he just doesn't have that. Number 12 is Trey Harris. Missed most of the season with injury, but always very productive for Ole Miss. He's got good size, good speed, but a lot of the time I felt his production was just him drifting into space as opposed to him genuinely creating separation, and he does lack that real suddenness when he tries to change direction. Number 11 is Isaiah Bond. He has some speed and elusiveness, but I wouldn't have known he was 180 pounds by the way he moves. He doesn't look as sharp as I would need him to look for someone who is lacking that physicality off the line, the ability to bring the ball in through contact, and just that real toughness you're going to need if you're not going to be particularly elusive. At 10, I've got Pat Bryant, who we've spoken about. Good route runner, good frame, dangerous after the catch. You might have noticed that this is my 10th ranked receiver, and my evaluation is a 4th round pick. Last season, there were 10 receivers drafted within the first 37 picks. So there are some gems in this class and some we haven't spoken about yet, but definitely a weaker receiver class in my opinion. I think part of this as well is that receivers have become slightly overvalued. Most offenses are more scheme-based than they used to be, as opposed to having a Devontae Adams or a DeAndre Hopkins to get open over and over again, and you don't really throw to anyone else. The way I see it, they've become a bit more replaceable than some other positions. Number 9 is Kobe Hudson. Needs to work on bringing the ball in, but has the upside of a very productive slot receiver. My number 8 is Tetairoa McMillan, so it's not like I think this guy is terrible. I just don't think he's going to stand out the way many people expect him to. I think he could be an okay second receiver in an offense, but to me that's someone you draft in the 3rd round. We haven't spoken about my number 7, which is Matthew Golden. I'm slightly lower on Golden than the consensus. Again, like McMillan, I think he could be an average second receiver. Decent size, decent speed, brings the ball in pretty consistently. He reminds me a lot of Emeka Egbuka, but he just has that extra bit of snap to his routes that sold me on him being pretty useful in the NFL. My number 6 is Caden Prather, who I'm a lot higher on than the consensus. He's only had 620 receiving yards last season, with the offense mainly targeting my 17th receiver in this ranking, Ty Felton. This could be because Felton has been on the team longer, whereas Prather was a transfer from West Virginia, but I see Prather as the bigger and more elusive receiver. He's not crazy explosive, but poses a deep threat with a combination of decent speed and a big frame. My favourite thing about him is his ability to chop and change direction. I think he could become a fairly significant part of an offense in the NFL. My number 5, Tej Johnson, isn't one who I was expecting to be high on. He's extremely lightweight at 165 pounds, but has real speed, so I was kind of expecting to see Xavier Worthy. I was pleasantly surprised to see someone a lot more gifted as a route runner. If he can stay healthy at this size, I think with how the rules are in the NFL today, defensive backs aren't going to be able to get physical enough with Johnson to stop him from creating separation with his speed and his ability to change direction. My number 4 is Xavier Restrepo, physical slot receiver who can stretch the field deep, bring the ball in through contact. He's not the most elusive route runner, but he creates a yard for himself with his burst and physicality, and then like I say, he doesn't need a ton of space because he is so good at coming down with the ball through contact. Bear in mind that these are still not guys who I see as your number 1 receiver. These are guys who I think could be high-end wide receiver 2s, but the first receiver I would consider drafting in the 1st round is my number 3, Jalen Knoll. I'm not saying draft him in the top 10, especially as in reality he's going to be there if you want him in the 2nd round anyway, but just in terms of my evaluation of this class, the Bengals at 17, if T. Higgins doesn't resign, Knoll is just that extremely reliable slot receiver who can stretch the field a bit as well. It's exactly what Joe Burrow needs. The Bucs at 19, if Chris Godwin doesn't resign. I think the Broncos at 20 are another offense that would be perfect for Jalen Knoll. I don't think he would suit the Steelers with that Arthur Smith offense, but the Rams at 26, if they are trading Cooper Kupp in order to sort of start a bit of a rebuild whilst remaining competitive, Knoll could be the younger replacement for Kupp and would absolutely thrive in that offense. He would be great for my Commanders, although I think we want to give Luke McCaffrey a bit of a chance in the slot next season. So lots of spots where I think Jalen Knoll would completely change the dynamic of an offense, as would his teammate and my number 2 on this list, Jaden Higgins. Completely different style of receiver, and again, he'll probably be there for whoever in the 2nd round, but if that wasn't the case, I would start to consider him at 8 for the Panthers, or I think he would be exactly what the Cowboys need at 12. I see Higgins as a legitimate wide receiver 1 for a team, and he really is neck and neck with my wide receiver 1 on this ranking. I think most offenses would favour my wide receiver 1 because the big, reliable X receiver isn't as much what teams are looking for anymore, but in my opinion, the battle for wide receiver 1 is between Jaden Higgins and Eli Oyonomor out of Stanford. This isn't someone completely under the radar, but he's not really being spoken about as a 1st round pick. I don't like him as much as my top 3 receivers in last year's class, which were McConkey, Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., but I think he's capable of being a good wide receiver 1 in an offense. He's got good speed, a good frame. His hands aren't always the most consistent, but he actually tracks the ball really well, if that makes sense. It's just a case of cleaning up a couple of drops. Most importantly, he's a physical and effective route runner. I don't think he stands out in any one category, which is why I shy away from saying he's a top 10 pick, but just someone who's going to be open consistently, can threaten downfield, can make a contested catch. Just a really good receiver, which to me in this class qualifies him as the wide receiver 1. I haven't included Travis Hunter in this, as I see him as a cornerback, and my best guess is that he's not going to play two positions on a regular basis. When the NFL made the NFL season 17 games, people were already saying that's pushing it. So playing double the snaps and not getting a break when your side of the field is done, the more I think about it, the less I think it makes any sense at all. So we'll be speaking about him in my cornerback video, which should be the next video I post, so keep an eye out for that. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing as it greatly supports the channel, and I'll see you next time.